At the beginning of the movie, two police officers, Cody and Mason, are chasing a suspect. Cody runs on ahead, and Mason tries to catch up with them. He hears a gunshot and runs towards the sound only to see a dead woman and Cody shot and injured. The culprit is nowhere to be found, so Mason stops to help support a weakening Cody. Cody begs him to take care of Lacey and to tell his brother John that he left something for him. Mason tries to keep Cody talking to him, but Cody dies in his arms. The cops soon pull up to the scene. In Queens, New York, John is hosting the reopening of his jazz bar with his bartender and his nephew there with him. His nephew has heard a lot of stories about his uncle, about his army tour and special ops missions and his amazing feats, and would love to learn more, but John tells him that Cody is the real badass and he will hear all the stories when he returns to help John run the bar. He sends his nephew off to clean up when two gangsters shove past him, demanding to know who owns the place. They have had their eyes on the place and offered John $20,000 above his purchase price for him to hand it over. John refuses and tells the men to have a good night, but the men get insulted at his cool demeanor. The top man threatens John to take the deal since he has no idea who he is dealing with. John signals to the bartender to ready his gun before standing to face the men. He tells them they crossed the line when they pushed his nephew and for the rude comments they have been making. John tells one man that he will break his jaw and put the second man to sleep, and the men all laugh as they think John is out of his mind. John notices that one of the men is carrying a gun, but the man has made a fatal mistake, allowing John to come in too close. In a split second, John unleashes some deadly strikes on the two men, dropping them in an instant. One man cries about his broken jaw, and John sends him flying through the store. As he stops to catch his breath, John gets a call that changes his entire mood. He learns about Cody's death. John flies into Europe soon after and travels to meet his former Special Ops teammate Briggs, who now runs all Special Ops units on the continent. The two recall their former days, and John plans only to stay until he buries Cody, who wanted to be buried with his former teammates. Briggs tells John about what went down the night Cody got shot. John asks about the investigation, but Briggs is hesitant to give any information knowing John. He finally explains that Mason and Cody were a part of a task force created to track down a drug syndicate that recently popped up but refuses to give any more details, reminding John that he is retired. John then goes to view Cody's body, becoming filled with rage in the process. Later, he breaks into Cody's apartment and begins looking around. He sees an old photograph of the two and has a flashback of the day the photo was taken. At Cody's funeral, Mason comes to pay his respects. A blonde woman also shows up but quickly leaves the room to avoid John's stare. John follows her outside, where he meets Volley, a former colleague of Cody's, who tells John that there was more to Cody's death than meets the eye. John wants to settle Cody's affairs first, then he plans to sit and talk with both Volley and Mason. John then watches as the blonde woman enters a car and leaves the compound. Mason then pulls up and hints to John that there are multiple people involved with Cody's death. We then see mob boss Joe Vig in an abandoned theater, ordering his men to keep an eye out as there is a lot of heat on them. He leaves the theater with a blonde woman, unaware that Mason is watching him. Once he sees the chance, Mason breaks into the theater and begins checking around. A man sneaks up on Mason, and the two exchange gunfire before the man escapes. Mason then fights his way out of the building, managing to kill his attackers in the gunfight. He then contacts Volley, wanting help with disposing of the bodies. The two plan to meet, and Mason warns Volley to be careful with a certain tape. Volley's wife comes to get him, and the two go to join the rest of the family for board games. There is a ring at the door, and Volley goes to check, but he sees no one. He heads in, but there is another ring. This time, his wife goes to the door when she is suddenly shot in the head. 3 masked gunmen enter the house, and Volley manages to shoot one before he is also hit. The rest of the men begin to attack the family, unaware that Volley's daughter is showering upstairs. She hears the commotion downstairs and calls for her parents, when another masked man barges in and grabs her. Mason drops off the bodies at Briggs's place. Mason thinks that John would be an asset to their operation, but Briggs refuses and tells Mason to go dark. Despite the warning, Mason contacts John, and the two plan to meet. John heads over to a club, where he chats it up with the bartender for a bit. The announcer calls out a dancing trio of girls, and one of the girls recognizes John with a shocked look on her face. Meanwhile, Mason is sitting in his car outside the club. He contacts Briggs and tells him about his meeting with John, and Briggs cusses him out for breaking his orders. The dancer turns out to be John's ex, Sky, who is angry at John for leaving her behind, but John sweet talks her, and the two share a moment. She suggests something naughty, and John agrees, but just then Mason enters to meet with him. Sky gets angry that John didn't actually come to see her and storms off. As the two sit to talk, John sees some men dragging Sky away, so John excuses himself. John chases after her and confronts the men. John drops the first man hard before throwing another man by his ear, ripping it off. The last man pulls a knife, but some swift kicks drop him. Outside, Mason sees a man rushing to the room and takes him out discreetly. The men rush out of the room, and John tells Sky to head home and lay low. John returns to sit with Mason and learns that Cody and he were investigating the Toro Syndicate. He adds that Volley has a tape with Joe Vig killing a night worker. Volley had shown the tape to Cody, who did not take the news well and went after Vig, who was the culprit that shot Cody. John immediately wants to know Vig's location, but just then, Vig walks through the door with his entourage. Vig's entire deal is using the girls from the club in his massive drug operation on behalf of Toro. Cody has evidence that could blow their entire operation, but he hid it for only John to find. Cody then secretly passes John Cody's gun. He warns John to watch his back before leaving. Mason heads back to his car when Briggs confronts him for breaking orders. Mason thinks he's the only one trying to solve Cody's death, but Briggs warns that this is way bigger than Cody's death. Just as Briggs leaves, a black van pulls up, and men start attacking Mason. He fights back and manages to beat his men, but one man who was standing a distance off disappears right after. Mason is recovering when a car slams into him, and the men escape the scene. John goes back to Cody's apartment and finds his hidden stash of evidence. Inside is a thumb drive, and on it is a video of Vig torturing a man named Ash, the man who passed the evidence to Cody, for betraying the organization. Another man in the video then shoots the tortured man dead. John goes over the video and pays special attention to the man that shot Ash dead. John then figures out Cody's cell phone and sees a video of Cody explaining that he cannot trust anyone. He has stashed away $5 million stolen from Toro, and the key is also among the evidence. That night, Vig confronts Sky and the bartender, demanding to know who the black man was in the club. They try to divert him, saying John was just a customer, but Vig slaps the bartender, suspecting she is lying. Sky confesses that John is her ex, but he thinks John is more than that as he saw the security tapes. The bartender then attacks Vig and escapes with Sky, so Vig sends his men after them. John is still at Cody's house that morning when someone starts entering the house. John attacks him, but it turns out to be Mason. Mason tells him about the attack, that he suspects Toro was the man standing a distance off watching him. Mason also suspects that Toro got to Volley as he never showed up for their meeting. Toro has gotten to everyone connected to the case, thinking they killed Mason, except John, who suspects that he is their next target. John then shows Mason the video of Vig killing Ash. The two track down Cody's former girl named Lacey. She once worked for Vig in his operation, but she and Cody fell in love, and he wanted to save her. She tried escaping, but the gang threatened her sister's life, forcing her to comply. She also shows John the injuries she got from Vig the last time she tried to escape. She then reveals that a shipment of girls is supposed to head out that same night. As John leaves, he receives a video showing Vig holding Sky and the bartender hostage, and this enrages him. John rushes over to the theater where the girls are recruited and confronts the manager Frankie, demanding Vig's location. Frankie denies knowing Vig, but John smacks him all over. The security is alerted, but the two responding men get a brutal beating. John grabs a hammer and turns his attention to Frankie, who confesses that Vig is upstairs. Meanwhile, Joe hears the commotion and is standing ready with his gun but accidentally shoots Frankie instead. John holds him at gunpoint and smacks him over the head but throws the gun down. He begins to lay down a brutal beating on Vig, who cannot seem to get even a hit in. John then slams him onto a piano before breaking his neck. Frankie begs for his life, saying that Toro forced him to work. He tells John about Toro's obsession with Lacey and that he comes to the club only for her. John drags him to Lacey's changing room and confronts her for being Toro's girl, but she explains that Toro is only obsessed with her and thinks she is his. He agrees to help her, but he tells her to set up a meeting with Toro to exchange her freedom for his $5 million. John then warns her not to mess this up. John then goes to meet Briggs at his office and tells him about his meeting with Toro and that he needs backup for the exchange, but Briggs refuses as he thinks John is mistaken. John and Mason then prepare to handle things themselves. The two arrive early to the exchange point and set up explosive traps all around the area. Mason then takes up a sniper position, just as a lone vehicle drives into the area. It is John, who steps out with a gun in hand. A convoy of 3 vehicles then approach, with 2 diverting, and a team of heavily armed men exit to take up positions. One van drives into the exchange area, and a team of men begin to scan the area before Toro arrives. The gang boss soon pulls up and steps out of the shadows wearing a cowboy hat. He drags Lacey out of the car, demanding that John show himself to make the exchange. Meanwhile, Mason is discovered, and a team of men begin tracking him down. He runs to take up another position nearby and takes aim at Toro, who is still calling for John to show himself or he will kill Lacey. Right before Mason can take the shot, the men tracking him set off an explosion, which alerts everyone. John opens fire on the men, while Mason covers him from his sniper position, dropping men who are trying to escape. The shooting dies down, and John calls for Toro to release Lacey, and he can get his money, which is inside the building. Toro stalls, demanding proof. Meanwhile, his men have located John and are closing in. Lacey tries to alert him and ends up getting shot. Toro's hat falls off, revealing himself to be Briggs. He turns to escape, leaving his men to take down Mason and John. The two fight back, using their skills to kill their attackers. John goes after Briggs, who escapes into the building to look for his cash. Briggs holds John at gunpoint, forcing him to disarm himself. He has John reveal the briefcase, and Briggs plans to take it and disappear. John reveals he found Briggs out from watching the video and recognized his custom gun he always carries. John warns him that things will not end well for him, but Briggs is not worried. Meanwhile, Mason is confronted by a man who reveals himself to be Volley's killer, and the two begin to fight, slashing at each other with their blades but not getting the upper hand. Mason keeps on pushing though, eventually getting the better of the man and kicking him over the ledge. Inside, John demands to know why Cody, and learns that Briggs simply wanted Lacey to love him instead of Cody, revealing himself to be truly obsessed. At that moment, Briggs opens fire on John, dropping him. He picks up the briefcase to leave, but John stands to his feet, warning that he will pay for his brother's life. Briggs is shocked but learns that John memorized his combination and snuck into his office to load his firearm and ammo with blanks. Briggs drops the gun, and the two men charge at each other and trade some heavy punches and kicks. The fight is intense, but John gains the upper hand and kicks Briggs down. The two go back at it, but John is just too fast and strong for Briggs. John beats him down with swift punches before kicking him into a deep hole in the floor of the building, killing Briggs and avenging Cody. 2 weeks later, Lacey now works as a waitress in a cafe under a new name. John enters, and the two speak for a while, and John learns that she is pregnant with Cody's baby. Once she walks away, John leaves his briefcase and a note behind and walks away. Inside, Lacey is shocked to see it is loaded with cash and a deed to Cody's home. John and Mason then take a walk, and Mason reveals he is taking over for Briggs and offers John a job.